welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for this. I know that you're all probably very busy, so thank you for having us in your screens this morning. We're really excited to be talking to you all today in what is the first live event exclusive to the Workspace community from Investors in People. I'm sure it won't be the last, and I hope that soon we can all meet face to face as well instead of over a screen. My name is Beth Sampson. I'm the OD and HR advisor at Investors in People. And I'm super excited to be joined today by Paul Devoy, the CEO at Investors in People, and the CEO of ClearReview, Stuart Hearn.
Morning.
Thank you.
Morning.
So today we're going to be discussing the choppy waters that we've faced over the past few months and what we're doing now to bounce back as things start to return to some kind of normal. A big thank you to everyone for the questions that you submitted in advance. We'll be getting through those later on, and we'll also have an opportunity to do some questions live too. I'm keen that we get through as much as possible, so we'll be keeping it very punchy with lots of useful information and key points to take away today. We will be recording this webinar and we'll share it with you by the end of the week, so don't worry too much about taking notes. You can just absorb our lovely faces and just sit back and enjoy. So I'll try and keep it as short and sweet as possible. We're aiming for around 40 minutes with a bit of Q&A. And as we're all in one big Zoom room together, nice and cozy, if I can ask you to please remain muted and keep your cameras off, other than Paul and Stuart, of course. So without any further ado, Stuart, I'll come to you first. Perhaps if you can tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how things have been at ClearReview during this time.
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of ClearReview, and for those of you who don't know us, we're an online performance management employee engagement provider. And I've worked in HR for 20 years. So I used to be an in-house HR director at Sony Music. Spent 8 years after that heading up a performance and talent management consultancy, and then I launched ClearReview in 2016. So I guess like all businesses, the last few months has been a really crazy and interesting ride for us. I'm pleased to say that considering the difficulty that all our staff have had with trying to manage work and in many cases homeschooling at the same time and having to do, like many organizations, some furlough when things first hit, we're actually in a really positive situation right now. And I can talk later on about some of the things that we've done, but certainly that bounce back that we kind of all hope for, we're definitely in that situation. And I think there's some things that we really did to proactively enable that to happen. It isn't just luck. A couple of things that have helped us internally at ClearReview during this time, we were a bit fortunate in the fact that we were already working partly remotely anyway. So since we founded the company, we wanted to have a culture of some collaboration time and some deep work time. So everyone was already doing 2 days a week from home. So we were already used to things like Zoom and Slack. They were kind of part of our day to day. So we had to kind of move that from 2 days a week to 5 days a week, which was still a transition, but less of a transition, I guess, than some companies. I think the second thing that has helped us as well is we obviously, you would hope that we practice what we preach internally. So we're all about performance and engagement of employees. That's what our software does. So we have a strong culture of that already. People were already working on clear goals that were aligned to company strategy. We had a cadence of regular one-to-one check-in conversations going on. So those are the things that I think have been invaluable and really helped us be in the situation we're in.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stuart. Sounds like you've got lots of really interesting things to share today. So thank you. And Paul, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, my name's Paul Devoy. I'm the CEO of Investors in People. I led the buyout of Investors in People from the government in 2016. For the last 3 years, we've been a community interest company. I think there's quite a lot of parallels with what Stuart has talked about in terms of our own experience. We've always advocated flexible working as an organisation. So all our staff had laptops, mobile phones. We didn't really have a lot of landlines or physical infrastructure. All our infrastructure was cloud-based. So when the COVID situation kicked in, when we had to move to home working, it didn't really disrupt greatly our operations because we had always worked flexibly anyway. My philosophy has always been that if you do your best work at 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, but you want to go and take your, pick your kid up from school at 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon, that's absolutely fine as long as it doesn't negatively impact upon your colleagues. So we've always taken that view. So as a result of that, it was relatively straightforward for us to adapt to everyone being forced to work from home right away. I think what we have noticed through the survey that we've done with our customers is that the majority of organisations have adapted pretty well. I think the big thing that people have noticed that they're missing is that social interaction, the ability to meet their colleagues face to face, the ability to interact. I think we underestimate how important the social aspect of work is for people. So I think going forward, we've probably moved forward 10 years in 10 weeks in terms of employers' attitude to flexible working and to home working. But I don't think the days of the office has gone completely, but I think we need to rethink about what office space is for. And I think going forward, based on the feedback that we've had from clients, people are now starting to think about it as being more of a social space, more of a place where people can meet and collaborate, rather than a place where you have to physically go there to do work. So hopefully we'll all take the positives out of it and bank those, but I don't think it means that everyone's going to work from home 100% of the time. I don't think that's necessarily healthy either. In terms of like our experience of the kind of business impact of it, I think the other thing that was positive for us is that we moved to doing all of our interaction with clients digitally, and that has worked really well. We've had positive feedback that clients have found that a positive way of doing it, and that's something that we will continue to encourage going forward. For us, the big challenge has been a lot of our customers have been closed, so therefore we've had a downturn in business as a result of that. And like most businesses, what we've been working hard to do is to give ourselves as lot bigger runway as possible, protect cash, so that we've got the opportunity to readjust and reevaluate our strategy, so that we can provide the services to our community that will help them thrive as we begin to come out of the lockdown, and a semblance of normality is starting to emerge.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's so true, isn't it? That sense of the importance of connection through work has really come through, I think, during this time. And what would you say has been the biggest learning curve, do you think? Sorry, Stuart, feel free to jump in.
I was just going to jump in and say, when we did our internal survey a few weeks ago about people's experience of working from home and do they want to go back to the office, if so, how long, for how frequent, it was the social aspect that came out the same, Paul. People felt that they could collaborate pretty well virtually, but for certain kind of big projects and for socializing, people just miss having lunch together, going down the pub, having the quiz, those kind of things. So we've done some of that virtually, but I think we need to think, when you do it virtually, those things don't happen so organically. So we just agreed to put a social committee in place to make sure that there is a regular cadence of social activities while we're still in a kind of quite virtualized environment.
Yeah, I think that is really important.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to see how kind of the practice has evolved as well over the time period. Like you say, maybe ideas like a social committee at the beginning wouldn't have been priority number one, but as time's gone on, it's emerged as something that's really needed. Brilliant, thank you. And I mean, is there anything that kind of stands out in either of your minds as the biggest sort of learning curve, or the kind of one key takeaway from this time?
I've got a couple. Yeah, I've got a couple. So firstly, we thought we had a good and right cadence of internal communication. So since we joined, every week on a Friday, which is one of the days we work remotely, we had what we call weekend wind down, where we all get on a Zoom call and everybody talks about their highlight from the week, anything that's frankly annoyed them in the week. So really kind of open exchange. And we thought that was fine. But what we found was that people were getting worried about the business, and we had monthly and quarterly all hands get-togethers, but we had to make those weekly because people wanted a weekly update on how we were doing, and a kind of warts and all. Where are the problems? What does the cash flow look like? Because it's people's livelihoods, and they're kind of worrying about that. And if you're not talking to them about it, they're making their own decisions of what they think it's going to be, which are always worse than the reality. So we had to make that weekly, and we've still got that in place, and maybe over time we'll make that fortnightly, but that's still working as this kind of weekly business update from me and then each of the teams. The other learning, and this was a positive learning of something I think we actually got right, was the speed of agility and execution. I think that's absolutely critical and will remain so. So like most businesses, we had to shift our strategy quite dramatically. So performance and engagement, they are obviously still massively important. In fact, arguably more so in the kind of environment that we're in. But the way, the aspects of them that are important are slightly different. So things like managing people remotely is really important. Managing people's well-being is really important. Getting people's goals aligned to a fast-changing strategy. So all that agility is really important. And those are things that us and our software were already managing, but they weren't necessarily the things that we would focus on most when we were talking to HR people. We were talking about coaching and development. So we had to fundamentally shift pretty much everything we did, from marketing, sales, a huge amount of materials, new videos. So I think something I read back in March when it started from McKinsey, they said the speed will win in this, and so we got everyone moving really fast. Now you can't do that all yourself, so we had to empower people, and every single person got involved in that. So we set the direction and said this is where we need to kind of get to, and then teams just ran with that themselves. So I think a learning for us is speed, agility, and empowering and involving people to deliver it, but deliver it fast. And if you can deliver it faster than your competitors, you'll come out of this in a much better situation, which is where we find ourselves right now.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a similar sort of thing. From a financial point of view, I think one of the things we've all learned is the importance of cash in a business during this time. Because cash gives you the runway in order to navigate this, because we don't know how long it's going to go on for. So that was a key element, but also around about how do you then deal with the crisis, and deal with the crisis quickly, as you said, Stuart, but then start to plan about, well, what does the recovery look like, and how do you get things in place for the recovery, and make sure that you're talking to your customers and talking to staff about how you organise yourself for that, and being really clear about what that means. So I think those were the two things for me.
Interesting you mentioned about cash and customers, and the two interlinked, because your cash runway is going to be pretty challenged if you lose customers. And something that I read it in many places, and we did this from day one. So what can we do to genuinely support our customers, because they're having a difficult time of it, but we know that if we support them at the end of this period, that will be recognized by people. So we did whatever we could to support our customers. So we gave all of our customers free access to our newly launched engagement and wellbeing module that we would have been charging money for. We gave it for free for 3 months, where people got into difficulties with their own cash flow. We were flexible on payment terms. So everything that we possibly could do. And our customer success people got out on the phone and tried to speak to every single one of our 300 customers. So it was a big mission for them to do that. But they found that sometimes those people, and particularly in HR who've been on the front line of this, just wanted someone to talk to, and a friendly voice and an empathetic voice at the end of the phone. And then we said, like, what can we do for you? And then they said, well, we don't know anything about wellbeing service. Can you just create stuff for us? So we created a load of things for free. And that's been massively important. And when we look at the beginning of this, we were forecasting maybe quite a lot of customer churn. We've lost less than 5 out of 300. So I think cash flow is really important, but there are things we can proactively do, and placing customers absolutely first is probably the most important thing I think you can do to protect that cash flow.
Yeah, and we found as well from our practitioners, the advice that they've been given and support that they've been given to their clients has been greatly received during all of this. And they've done a brilliant job stepping up and helping their clients as best they can. when they've been a bit at sea in terms of what do they need to do, and that advice and support I think is really important. One of the things we've done is create a free COVID product where members of our community can go online and do a survey that helps them navigate the change and the recovery. So similar to you, Stuart, providing free tools and services to enable your community, your customers to manage through this crisis as best they can, so that you can see that you're there to support them come what may, and providing as much flexibility about things that may have been, rules before that you've taken away in order to facilitate that change. I think is really important in terms of the support you can offer.
Yeah, and it's not just about something that we felt. It's not just about, well, we're doing this, look after our customers so we get good cash flow. I think there's been a sense of let's all just look out for each other in this, for all businesses. And certainly the way that we've treated our suppliers, when we looked at our cash flow forecast and we realized we had to cut costs until we knew what the landscape looked like, we didn't cut things back left, right, and center, because we thought, well, if we do that, then people can do that to each other, and then the whole thing falls down. So we've just tried to find ways that we can keep everything moving, so that when we start to move into recovery, we're not moving from a zero position. Everyone's kind of still moving in some way, albeit maybe a little bit slower than before.
Yeah,
I think it's been one of the big upsides to all of this, I think, is we've all seen a much more kind of human side to each other, almost the way that businesses are dealing with each other, leaders, teams. And I think I've also seen, more conversations around wellbeing and mental health, and those being normalized in a way which just haven't been before as well, which is great news to me. I think that's what needs to happen. We need to talk about these things. And you mentioned the survey pool that we've been offering for free to businesses. And internally, one of the things that I've been doing is running just a pulse survey every 2 weeks to check in with everybody, asking them how they're doing, and just getting that feel for how people are in the business and adjusting our approach accordingly. And I think that's definitely helped throughout this time, where it's been much harder to kind of gauge almost the atmosphere in the business because you're not all together in one place. So I just wanted to circle back, if I may, Stuart, to one of the things that you mentioned quite early on about trust. I saw a quote recently saying that working from home essentially is all about trust. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how you've empowered the team at ClearReview?
Sure. I can tell you what we haven't done. We haven't installed activity monitoring software on everyone's computers. Like I've received many emails from suppliers trying to get me to do that. So that's a kind of a parent-child way of looking at it. We've treated people as adults and said, right, well, let's be really clear about what the organization is trying to achieve. So over-communicate on our strategy, agree with everyone what their clear deliverables and objectives are against that, both as individuals and teams, and then we'll leave you to get on with doing that, and we'll have a regular cadence of check-ins to support you and make sure that that's all happening to plan. And it's less about checking up on you, it's more about coaching you to overcome some of the barriers to achieving those things you need to achieve. And I think that's quite important, the difference between the two. So that's been really important for us on a kind of getting work delivered basis. And like you, Paul, we've always believed that it doesn't matter when you're working. I don't care if you're online at this particular time, unless you've got a specific meeting. You can work at 4 a.m. or on a Sunday and play tennis for 2 hours in the middle of the day, like some of our people do. That's fine, as long as you're delivering what you need to do. But you have to agree what those deliverables look like and have those agreed in order to have that trust. The other thing that we have done is had a real culture of honesty and transparency from the top. So I talked about the business strategy updates. I was really honest about our cash flow forecast. So we just shared our finances. This is our bank balance now. This is what it's going to be in 6 months if these things happen. If these things don't happen, it will be this. So we're looking to furlough some people for this period and it will make it this. So real honesty and transparency has been really good. And then everyone kind of steps up and rallies around, because then they see their part that they have to play in that. So that's been a couple of things that we've done on kind of empowerment and trust.
Yeah, we've been similar. I mean, we shared the financial position of the business with the staff, let them know, and then use that as a basis to explain any decisions that we were making around about furlough and things. so that people understood the context within which those decisions were being made. We had a weekly Zoom call on a Thursday where the furloughed staff and the staff that were still working who could join and ask any kind of questions they wanted. We shared updates on where we were financially. And we also had a regular, we have what we call Project Penguins. We've got a project management system that we stopped it for a little while, which is one of the lessons that I've learned through this. We stopped it for a little while when COVID kicked in, but actually I think one of the lessons I've learned is that during that period, some of the communication and some of the project management that we were doing before didn't quite stick. So I think sometimes in a crisis, you can sometimes let go of some of the things too quickly that were actually delivering you for you beforehand. So we recognised that through the pulse surveys that Beth was running, that we needed to reinstate them. So we've reinstated them again so that we've got much more visibility of how projects are being delivered and are they being delivered on time, and people give a visibility in terms of being able to question if things that they don't understand is happening moving forward. So I guess one of my big takeaways is in a crisis, sometimes you become too reactive, and some of the things and disciplines that you had before, you need to keep hold of them because they'll see you through the other side in a much more positive way.
So I think it's been really interesting for me to see the role of information sharing as well. One of the points that was raised with me is that in the office, you could see when people were talking about different topics because you'd see them go into a meeting room together. And that's just not something that's so easy to replicate virtually and remotely. And I guess there's a role that we can play in creating certainty for people with information as well, even if, the information can be troubling to read if it's financial. It still kind of fills that gap in people's minds. And that helps to reduce some of the anxiety around the unknown, which has definitely been something I think lots of us have experienced during this time.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll move on now to talk a little bit more about the bounce back. I think, we're all excited to come back to some kind of normal and start looking more optimistically towards the future now. So what does the next few months look like for Clear Review, Stuart?
I'm pleased to say that they're really positive, and I always feel a bit kind of torn talking about this because obviously not every business is in the same situation. I have neighbours that work in recruitment and they're having a really tough time. But I'd like to think that the work that we did on pivoting our strategy really fast, and everyone worked so hard on that, we're seeing it deliver results. So last month we had our best sales month ever, which amid the crisis is something that we didn't see happening in March when we couldn't even speak to anybody. HR were basically off radar for about 6 weeks because we couldn't talk to them. So that's been really good. And I think I'll talk about this until the cows come home about that. I think the way that we managed people is one of the key successes to that. And I've worked in HR for many years, and HR know this. And when you talk to the CEO or FD often falls upon kind of deaf ears about, managing people, conversations development, helping them to understand what's going on is really important. I think what this crisis has shown is that it is absolutely business critical now, and especially in a remote environment where you can't see people. We need to think about how we manage people. And I know Lucy Adams has been talking about the new normal as being the better normal, and I really agree with that. I think we see a culture of treating people as adults and coaching and developing them, helping them to understand what deliverables are, and then empowering them to get on with doing that. I think that we'll see more of that, and we're already having more conversations now with CEOs and FDs that are saying, what you do, we need to change our performance management faster. So whereas we saw an initial slowdown, we're seeing people that get that this stuff matters wanting to do business even quicker. So I think where the next 6-12 months will look for me is there'll be some things that will obviously slow down and be difficult, but I think if you can pivot your market offering to hit one of these kind of key factors around remote working or productivity, how can we improve companies' productivity and help lift them out of this kind of difficult situation and help them to bounce back? I think there are willing ears willing to spend money for organizations that can offer that. So that's kind of my view of the next 6-12 months.
Thanks, Stuart. And how about you, Paul?
Yeah, I would agree with all of those sentiments. One of the things that one of my non-exec directors said to me last week in terms of how you manage your way out of this, it's about demonstrating to your existing clients and potential clients that what their spend on your spend is, their spend on your products or services is good spend, and that no matter what the circumstances are in the wider economy, working with you will help them get through that. And I think that's a key thing that we're trying to communicate. We've run I know you mentioned Lucy Adams there. We've been running a campaign about creating a better normal as well, with 7 commitments that we are suggesting that employers adopt in order to maximise the potential of their people. And it's along all the similar lines that you just spoke about, Stuart. So hopefully, not hopefully, I believe that this can be a sea change, because we've seen how important it is to have empowered workforce and workforce that have autonomy to make decisions. And when you have that, they will help guide your business through the next transition and help your business stay sustainable, no matter what the economic environment might throw at them.
And Paul, are you seeing that thing that we're experiencing about more CEOs and FDs now being open to that message about how important people are, whereas maybe before it was more of an HR kind of bell that we're ringing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole home working thing has been a perfect example of that. Is that there was that mindset there that if you couldn't fix eyes on someone, you didn't actually know what they were doing. Someone gave me a quote the other week there. Well, if you're having to monitor every minute that someone's working, there's a lack of trust there. So why are you employing people that you don't trust? You know, so there should be that basis of trust there. And if people are delivering, as you said, Stuart, against the deliverables and the objectives, how they go about organising that, it should be for them to decide. It shouldn't be dictated to them. So I think we have seen a shift, because if they can build that trust with their employees and empower their employees, CEOs and FDs will get a much bigger return than they had before. But they have to move away from that sense that they have to have control over everything and very heavy monitoring. That for me isn't going to deliver the outcomes.
And what ideas do you both have about maintaining kind of the level of productivity as we go into this new phase? You know, perhaps people are feeling a bit exhausted. There's been lots of talk about burnout. How are you working through that?
I think well-being is really important. So, you know, everyone can understand the strategy and get stuck in, but you're right, everyone's tired. And as I say, we've done a huge amount of work and everyone's rallied around, but you need to give people, they can't operate at that pace forever. And secondly, you know, with the homeschooling as well, people need a holiday. So we've been making sure that people are taking holidays. But we've really focused on well-being, and we already had a thing that we used to call Wellbeing Wednesday, which was always on a Thursday for some reason. And it was a monthly thing where we got together for 90 minutes, facilitated by an external coach, where we just talked about different aspects of well-being. Now, what everyone asked during the lockdown is that could we do that every 2 weeks, because people really felt that it was valuable to be able to talk openly about this stuff. So we've been doing that every 2 weeks, and that's been really helpful. And we've been taking clear actions on the back of that. And I think it's the same with surveys. Whether you do it as a group Zoom call like we do, or surveys, and we do both, you've got to be able to take action on the back of it. And there's some really good things that's come up on that around, if I'm going to do this for quite a long period of time, well, actually, I don't have a desk properly, I can't work on the end of my bed. So there's kind of the physical things. But then we've talked about other things like, you know, meditation, positive affirmations, lots of kind of stuff that people wouldn't have been comfortable talking about, that might have felt a little bit out there, stuff that I love, but that I wouldn't necessarily push on my staff. Everyone has been really open about that. And I think being able to just share stories with colleagues, and not always good, but things about difficulties with families and concerns about people back in other countries where they were originally from, have come up. And so being able to have that mouthpiece where people can talk about those things helps you to get through this as more of a marathon, whereas if you treat it as a sprint, everyone would just kind of fall over. Yeah,
I agree with the point about well-being. launched our wellbeing product, which really focuses on people's psychological, social and physical wellbeing. And I think all of these three kind of headline topics have been brought to the fore during the whole COVID-19 crisis. But I'd like to ask Beth to talk about, because Beth has been leading our wellbeing strategy and done an awesome job on that. Beth, do you want to talk about some of the specific things that you've put in place?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think I'm incredibly passionate about the topic. You know, I've got lived experience of kind of managing mental health, and I do believe that we don't leave our real selves at the door when we go to work, and especially not now. We can all see our kind of real lives. So I think the key thing to start with is to gather data, gather real insights and information about how your people are and the kind of things that they need. Because it's very easy to kind of start from a place of assumptions about what people might want. But it's much better to go right back to basics and actually find out, you know, what the real needs are. So being quite data driven. And the way that we've done that is through running surveys, but it's also by having a team of wellbeing champions who do a fantastic job of just connecting with people in the business and feeding that back into a forum where we can have sort of manageable actions to come from that. I think it's also about culture and about leadership actions from the top. So one of the things that Paul and other members of the senior team at Investors in People did early on, which I thought was really impressive, is actually just blocking out time in the diary for things like walks, you know, meditation, time with family, almost visually signaling how important those kind of self-care measures are. Even when the chips are down and we're all very busy, you have to have that time to recharge in order to be effective. And I guess my kind of last thing that we've done, and I think we do pretty well, is signposting. So just making sure that at the point of need, people can access the resources which are helpful to them, whether that's having links and email signatures, like a one place on your intranet, a hub where everything could be found, or just regularly making sure those conversations are happening. And I think, you know, Clear Review have some great prompts to have those conversations with managers. And I know Mind have done some amazing work as well with like wellness action plans. So all of those things kind of add up together to create a culture which is supportive and puts the well-being of people at the fore. And speaking as an HR person, I think sometimes there can be a bit of tension between the kind of HR process and procedure hat and maybe the OD kind of well-being and people hat. But I'm a strong believer. You don't have to always follow a rigorous process and ignore the person at the heart of the equation. I think it has to be the person first.
Yeah, well said, Beth.
Thanks. So I'm going to move on to some of the questions that have come through before the session. So first up on the list is a question around how we can build a strong team culture virtually. Who would like to take that one?
Yeah, I can kick off with this. I'm sure Paul will have some things to say as well. But because we've been doing the virtual thing for quite a long time, or admittedly part-time, I think there's some things we've done right. So I think that I mentioned the Wellbeing Wednesday. That's been really good. And then the weekend wind down, as we call it, where everyone can just go individually. We talk about the things that have been successful in the week and any frustrations we've had. Because I think sometimes when you get to the end of the week, especially if you're virtual, you kind of get to that moment where you just, well, it's 5:30, I guess I'll just switch off then, right? So we end the week on a bit of a high where, you know, Friday might have been quite a chill day, but there's always something you can think back on the week that went pretty well, or, you know, that's a memory for you. So that's been really important. I think collaboration is really important as well. And that's something that actually took us by surprise. So we always worked virtually, but we had time, a couple of days where we would get together. And without that, you can find that silos start to build up. So people are working brilliantly in their teams, delivering what they need to do, but they're not aligned, and people are not really talking to each other's teams because they don't need to. So one of the things that we put in place is what we call collaborative goals. So at the goal setting stage, so we do quarterly OKRs, is that saying, right, for each one of those, who do I need to collaborate with in order to deliver that? And we invite those collaborators at that time. It's almost like the handshake that we're going to work together on this. And then when you do that, what happens is the collaboration kind of happens naturally, because they have to have meetings. And I think that works much better than a kind of forced cadence of team A should have a meeting with team B every 2 weeks. And then like, what are they going to talk about? and then the last thing is socializing, and think about how you can make that virtual as well. So, virtual team quizzes, and that's been quite a positive thing that we've seen, because we've got overseas staff and they always felt a bit left out when we did a lot too much stuff in the office. So our US based staff have felt much more included, weirdly, because we've had to do things more virtually in terms of the socialization. So those would be my kind of cultural things that stick out in my mind. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I think the thing that really jumped out at me is when I've seen teams actually just readjust how they operate, because they've got the space to do that and actually make decisions themselves and move things forward. So I think for me culturally, that seeing what happens when you give people autonomy to actually make decisions and how they can just implement that quickly if they feel that there's psychological safety to do it, that for me has been a key thing. I think the other thing that's key is trust, because if that basis of trust is there, you can have the difficult conversations if things aren't going right. But if you don't have that, then these things don't get handled in the right way. So one of the things I'm really keen to push forward on is we build that trust going forward, and then we can have the difficult conversations off the back of that, and positive conversations obviously as well. But when you have that there, then that then starts to create a culture where there isn't anything hidden, there isn't anything in the background, that people are actually honest with each other, and then with that honesty and feedback, then you can then drive the right decisions.
Absolutely. So another question that came through, which I think is a really interesting one. If bonuses aren't an option, how can we reward our people and keep them motivated to perform throughout this crisis?
Yeah, I've got really strong views on this, and I've written books on the subject. Paul might have heard some of my views on this before.
Yeah,
so,
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, money's never been a motivator anyway. So you look into all the science and the research behind this, right back to the kind of motivation hygiene to back to factor theory. Money's a demotivator if you don't get it right, but it's never a motivator. So the fact that people can't give people bonuses at the moment, well, it's forcing us to do the things that we probably should have been doing anyway, which is focusing on intrinsic motivators, things like autonomy, responsibility, personal growth. So, I'd advise people to start off by looking at something like Dan Pink's Drive book, which talks about internal motivators. And another thing that's important in terms of internal motivators is the importance of feedback, but meaningful feedback. So if you look at some of the science, like the job characteristics model, it found that feedback has a multiplier effect on every other motivator. So, but it has to be meaningful feedback. It can't just be, hey, a thumbs up or a kind of recognition point or something like that. People need to know how what they did affected other people in a positive or otherwise way. If you can do that and build up that culture regularly, you can get a massive improvement in motivation. And we've thought of lots of different ways of being able to give feedback and recognize people meaningfully, and that's been really powerful. Some using our own software, some on the weekend wind down where we give shout outs and things like that. But it can't just be a kind of, hey, shout out to Stu. It's about why it was important.
Yeah, I would just echo all of that. I've always been a big fan of Dan Pink's work around about drive and motivation. So yeah, just completely echo Stuart on that. I think you said that better than I could have.
Yeah, same. I just think that's so true. And, I guess it's a challenge that we have to think through consciously now, that you don't walk out of a meeting and you can kind of tap someone on the arm and say you did a great job. It's different, isn't it, remotely? So yeah, completely agree. It's about using the tools available to make sure that can happen.
Yeah.
So next up, how do I make sure my people are really doing okay when I can't see them?
So I've talked about this cadence of regular conversations, and we've advocated that for a long time. One of the things that we've seen and that we've done as well internally is bringing well-being into those conversations. So often one-to-ones will focus on tactical stuff, right? Where are you at with this project? But actually making it normal to bring in how are you doing into those conversations. So I've got a couple of tools that are really simple that everyone can use that work really well for us. So starting the conversation with, how are you doing? And then, okay, how are you really doing? And we put that at the start of every one of our conversations, and the conversation takes a completely different turn. And it's given that psychological safety to say, look, I do genuinely care, so you can talk about stuff. And then the other one is something that our coach introduced to us that we did in the Wellbeing Wednesdays. We've now started doing in our one-to-ones. It's starting every one of them after those questions saying, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today? And then they might say a 5 or a 7, and you can then follow up saying, what could get you just 1 point higher? And then that just gets you into a conversation about what can we do just to help you out. And then you can move into other stuff. But I think as long as, if you haven't if there's stuff going on in the background that you haven't got out on the table, you can't really have a meaningful conversation about why something might be falling behind, because you need to address the real underlying feelings first, and then you can talk about work. So that's what we do.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think the thing that I always try to do is to understand what's going on in the person's life outside of work, particularly now with homework and when people are trying to maybe homeschool, and you know, they maybe got a partner who's working and they're trying to divvy childcare up between the two of them. I think we underestimate the impact of what's going on in people's home life, and I think taking the time to really understand that and what that means for the individual, shows that you genuinely care, so it takes you back to the trust element, but also you can put anything that they're trying to manage in a context, and work with them more effectively on that basis. So that's something certainly I try to do, is to really understand who they are as a person and what's going on for them outside of work, and then look at work within that context.
Yeah, and it's funny when you ask that second "how are you really doing" question, I find that all those things just come out. So you don't have to say so how things at home, how things the family, and they just come out, and it's a much more natural conversation.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. So another question we've got here: is now the right time to think about changing our product to suit a new normal, or should we be carrying on with what we have? What are your views on that one?
So I believe that should always be your mindset, whether it's going through COVID-19 or not. I think the amount of change that we experience now in the world that we live in, COVID's just the latest thing. You know, you can go back the last 5-10 years and all the things that happened that no one predicted that had huge impacts. You know, very few people were predicting Brexit or Donald Trump as president, or you just go on and on and on with a big list of things that no one predicted. So the only way that you can thrive in an environment like this is to be the word that I like to use is what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragile. So the more complex and uncertain the world is around about you, the more that you thrive. I don't think you can have any sacred cows anymore. You have to have an organisation that can react to the environment that's around them. You have certain core principles, and your purpose is your guiding North Star. But outside of that, you need to be able to pivot and change. And the organisations who can pivot and change in the way that Stuart described earlier are the ones that's going to succeed. In a way, it's kind of like natural selection, because the more chaotic and unpredictable the world is, it's only organisations who are able to thrive in that environment that's actually going to do well. And I know as human beings, we're hardwired looking for certainty. I just don't think that certainty's there anymore. And quite often when I hear about, forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility or these other organisations that say, well, in 6 months' time, it's going to look like this. Invariably, they're always wrong. So why do we pay attention to them when they're always wrong? You wouldn't accept it from anyone else, but we accept it because of our innate need for somebody to provide us with a bit of certainty. So we tolerate it because it gives us that feeling of certainty, even when it's false. So one of the things I think we need to think about is, how do you plan in a world that's uncertain? And how do you then manage your organisation in an uncertain world? And that means, it only means one thing, is that you need to be able to adjust to what the world throws at you and take advantage of it when it comes.
Yeah. I'd agree with all of that, and just putting that into practicalities. You're right, Paul. You've got to have your North Star and know where you're going. But for us, we don't plan anything now on more than a quarterly basis. Everything is quarterly, because if I did something that I thought would happen in 6 months, experience has shown us when we get there, it won't be what we need or what we need to do. So quarterly is about as much as we can handle.
Yeah. And even sometimes quarterly feels like quite a long horizon these
days. It does. By the time you get to the end of that, well, that didn't quite go the way that we expected. So we had to pivot along that as well. So just being as agile as you can be.
And kind of, I mean, building on that theme, we've had a question come through asking, if you have to make redundancies to survive, what advice do you have on making it as painless as possible?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, unfortunately, we have had to make some redundancies, and it's the first time I've ever had to do that, and it's the most horrible experience. Not something I ever want to repeat. But I think what we've done is to try and give everyone as long a runway as possible in terms of financially looking after them, but also making sure that we help them onto their next role as best that we can by giving them all the support we can to get them into their next role, and having lots of conversations and showing as much care and empathy as we can through a difficult situation. I've been under threat of redundancy myself a couple of times, so I know what it's like. It's incredibly unsettling. And the other thing that I always try to do is to be really clear that it's not about them. They've done nothing wrong. This is a situation that they're on the receiving end of. So what can we do to actually help them transition in the best way possible?
I'd agree with that. I'd just add one other thing that I've unfortunately, my HR career had to make many redundancies. And one of the things that's really important is what I call focusing on the survivors as well. Because we naturally want to look after the people rightly who are leaving, but actually the people that are remaining are the people that are going to continue your business on. And we need to make sure we're paying as much attention to them. And I think one of the things that, if it's possible, that helps is, if you're going to make redundancies, try and do it in one hit. There's this death by 1,000 cuts is kind of just a way to kill your motivation over time. And they say, well, is there another batch coming, and then another? So if you can do it in one hit, it's much better. You can say, right, we've done what we needed to do. Let's now move forward and move upwards.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I think I'd just build on that last point, as well as looking after the survivors. I think it's also important to look after the people managing the process. It's incredibly demanding emotionally and from a time point of view. So whether it's kind of your senior leaders or your managers that are having those conversations, just ensuring that they've got the support behind them if they need it, so that they can put that effort and energy into having that kind of human, personal approach, and perhaps not slip back into the more kind of robotic script reading, which can be more damaging. But whoever put that question through, I'm more than happy. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, I can talk through some of the things that I've come across which could be helpful. And I've so enjoyed this conversation today. I think it's been absolutely fascinating, and I love hearing your guys' views on things. We're coming up to the end of the hour now, so I'll start to wrap up. We've covered some really interesting topics about well-being, productivity, trust, and some really practical things that we can think about as we bounce back. I'll just give the opportunity, if anybody's got any burning questions, to share those through the chat. Just give 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes for that. And perhaps while people are typing, Paul and Stuart, if you want to kind of sum up in a nutshell, what are your key thoughts about our bounce back that we're going through right now?
Paul, do you want to go first?
Sorry, what did you say there, Stuart?
Sorry, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I think it kind of goes back to the point I just made, is about how do you think about your bounce back in a world that is very uncertain. So for me, it's about focusing on what's your purpose, what's the core reason for why you're being there, and then how do you create an organisation that's agile enough to respond to whatever happens that you can't predict. And anyone who tells you they've got some, elixir that can tell you how to predict the future, then run a mile from them, because I just don't believe it. it's down to us in terms of how we're able to take advantage of uncertainty.
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. Yeah, agility is key. And I think for me, thinking about and spending a lot of time trying to think about what the new or the better normal is going to look like, and think about what you can do in your product or service that can facilitate that. And even more important than that, how can you then help your buyers understand that? Do you need to start talking to new buyers, or your same buyers going to be okay? But do you need to pivot your messaging, your marketing, the way that your product is packaged or priced? All of those things probably need to be revisited. And if you get that right, then there will be buyers for your product, but you just have to really thinking carefully about meeting that product need and then meeting it in the right way with the right people that you're talking to.
Thank you so much. We haven't had any questions come through the chat, so I'll just wrap up by saying, look out for an email from us sharing the recording of this session. And also, if you've liked what you've heard today, please do check out the Investors in People website. Feel free to sign up to our mailing list for more insights like this. And also do check out Clear Review as well. We're certainly very, very happy clients, and I know you've made a huge difference to our experience during lockdown. So
thanks, Beth. Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Cheers, everyone. Bye.